Everyone has heard of Cajun seasoning. Millions have tasted Cajun food, but almost nobody knows where the Cajuns came from, or why they ever came to Louisiana in the first place. Before Cajun became a flavor, it was the name of a people who lost everything and refused to lose who they were. Long before the word Cajun became associated with Louisiana, spicy food, or swamp country, there were the Acadians. In the early 1600s, French settlers crossed the Atlantic and established small farming communities in a region known as Acadia, stretching across what is now Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island in Canada. Rather than building large cities, they created peaceful villages along rivers and marshes, engineering an ingenious system of dikes to reclaim fertile farmland from the tides of the Bay of Fundy. Generations grew up speaking French, practicing their Catholic faith, and relying on close-knit families and neighbors to survive. They traded with the local Mi'kmaq people, learned from one another, and developed a culture unlike any other in North America. For decades, they largely stayed out of the wars between France and Britain, believing that neutrality would protect their homes and families. But history has a way of ignoring those who simply want to live in peace. As Europe's empires fought for control of North America, the Acadians found themselves caught between two powerful nations, and the quiet life they had spent more than a century building was about to be shattered forever. Everything changed in 1755. After Britain secured control of Acadia, colonial officials demanded that the Acadians swear an unconditional oath of loyalty to the British Crown. Many refused, not because they were preparing to rebel, but because they feared taking up arms against their French relatives or their Mi'kmaq allies. Their neutrality, once tolerated, was suddenly viewed as a threat. On September 5, 1755, hundreds of Acadian men were summoned to a church in Grand Prairies under the pretense of an important announcement. Instead, they were informed that their lands, homes, livestock, and possessions had been seized, and that they and their families would be deported. Soldiers rounded up entire communities, separating husbands from wives and children from parents. Homes, barns, and crops were burned to prevent anyone from returning. Families were crowded onto overcrowded ships bound for unfamiliar shores, where disease, hunger, and uncertainty claimed countless lives. The tragedy became known as the Grand Dérangement, or the Great Upheaval, one of the largest forced expulsions in North American history. In a matter of months, a thriving people had been scattered across the Atlantic world, carrying little more than their faith, their language, and the hope that one day they might find a place to call home again. The Great Expulsion did not end when the ships reached shore. It was only the beginning. Acadian families were scattered among Britain's American colonies, sent to England, France, and islands in the Caribbean, often arriving with little food, few possessions, and no certainty about what came next. Many were unwelcome wherever they landed, viewed as outsiders and burdens. Disease, poverty, and separation continued to claim lives, while countless families searched for loved ones they had lost during the deportation. For years, the Acadians lived as refugees, carrying only their language, faith, and determination to survive. Then an opportunity emerged. Spanish-controlled Louisiana, eager to strengthen its frontier, welcomed many of the displaced Acadians during the late 1700s. They settled among the bayous, prairies, and waterways of southern Louisiana, where the land offered a chance to rebuild. Over time, the word Acadian slowly evolved in local speech into Cajun. They had lost their homeland, but they had finally found another place where their culture could take root and endure. Southern Louisiana looked nothing like the Acadians' former home, but they adapted with remarkable determination. Instead of tidal marshes, they found winding bayous, vast prairies, dense cypress swamps, and a landscape rich with fish, game, and fertile soil. Small communities sprang up in places that would later become the heart of Cajun country. Families built modest homes, raised cattle, trapped fur-bearing animals, farmed the land, and fished the countless waterways that surrounded them. Along the way, they blended pieces of their Acadian heritage with influences from Native American tribes, Spanish settlers, Africans, Germans, and later the French-speaking Creoles already living in Louisiana. Out of that mixture grew a culture unlike any other in America. The Cajuns developed their own dialect, music, recipes, customs, and way of life, shaped by hard work, close families, and a deep connection to the land. They were no longer simply Acadian refugees. In Louisiana, they became the Cajun people. Walk into almost any grocery store in America, and you'll find Cajun seasoning on the shelf. Restaurants advertise Cajun chicken, Cajun fries, and Cajun seafood, leading many people to believe that Cajun is simply a flavor. But Cajun was never a spice blend. It was, and still is, the name of a people whose identity was forged through exile, survival, and perseverance. Their culture is built on family, faith, hard work, and a deep sense of community. For generations, neighbors gathered for boucheries, where families shared the work of preparing food together. Music filled dance halls with the sound of fiddles and accordions, while stories and traditions were passed from grandparents to grandchildren in Cajun French. The food that eventually became famous was simply an expression of that way of life, created from local ingredients and a determination to waste nothing. Cajun culture isn't something you sprinkle on dinner. It's a living heritage that has endured for more than 2.5 centuries. If you ask someone outside Louisiana what makes a person Cajun, they'll probably mention gumbo, crawfish, or a thick southern accent. Those traditions are certainly part of the culture, but they're only a small piece of a much larger story. Cajun life is rooted in music that fills dance halls, community festivals that bring generations together, and family gatherings where recipes, stories, and traditions are shared around the same table. It lives in the unique rhythms of Cajun French, in the colorful Couleur de Mardi Gras celebrations that differ from the parades of New Orleans, and in a deep respect for faith, hospitality, and helping neighbors when times are hard. For generations, these customs were passed down not through books, but by living them every day. The food may be what first introduces people to Cajun culture, but it is the people, their resilience, and their traditions that have kept that culture alive for more than 250 years. By the early 1900s, many believed Cajun culture would slowly disappear. Children were often discouraged and sometimes even punished for speaking Cajun French in school, as English became the language of education and business. Parents who had endured that experience often chose not to teach the language to the next generation, hoping to spare their children the same hardships. Yet while the language declined, the spirit of the Cajun people endured. Families continued gathering around music, food, faith, and traditions that had survived since the days of Acadia. In the late 20th century, a renewed sense of pride sparked a cultural revival. Festivals celebrated Cajun heritage, musicians introduced the sound to new audiences, and organizations worked to preserve the French language and local traditions. Today, Cajun culture is not a relic of the past, but a living part of Louisiana. More than 250 years after being forced from their homeland, the descendants of the Acadians continue to honor their history, proving that a people can lose their land without ever losing their identity. Today, the word Cajun appears on restaurant menus, spice bottles, television shows, and souvenir shops across America. Yet behind that familiar name is a story far deeper than most people ever realize. It is the story of ordinary families who were driven from their homes, scattered across continents, and forced to begin again in an unfamiliar land. Instead of allowing tragedy to define them, they built thriving communities across the bayous and prairies of Louisiana, preserving their language, traditions, music, and values through generations of change. Their influence can be heard in every fiddle tune, tasted in every family recipe, and seen in the warmth and hospitality that remain hallmarks of Cajun country. Cajun isn't just a seasoning. It isn't just gumbo or crawfish. It is one of America's most remarkable stories of resilience, perseverance, and cultural survival. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. A culture isn't remembered because of what it eats. It's remembered because its people refuse to let it disappear. Here at the Dusty Ledger, those are exactly the kinds of stories worth preserving, because sometimes the richest chapters of history are hidden in plain sight.